14th decree. Get ready, get ready, get ready. The Great Controversy, pages 37 and 38. Jesus declares, "There shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations. Those who behold these harbingers of his coming are to know that it is near, even at the doors." 14th decree. Get ready, get ready, get ready. The scripture were mentioned in the Great Controversy, pages 37 and 38. Luke chapter 21, verse 5. "And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring." Matthew chapter 24, verses 29, 30, and 33. "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors." Mark chapter 13, verses 24 to 26. "But in those days after that tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory." Revelation chapter 6, verses 12 to 17. "And I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth earth untimely figs, when she is shaken off of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their place. And the kings of the earth, and the great man, and the rich man, and the chief captains, and the mighty man, and every bound man, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand?" Fourteenth decree. Get ready, get ready, get ready. Table of contents. Know the time of your visitation. Peace when there is no peace. Hunger, artificial intelligence, education. Pestilences, effects on non-believers and believers. Come out of the cities. Get all things ready for the crisis. This interview on CTV's Your Morning Monday with York University astronomy professor Paul Delaney is dated December 21st, 2020, which is past, but contains some interesting information. Monday's winter solstice date will bring about an astrological event known as a Great Conjunction, when gas giant planets Jupiter and Saturn will appear to align in the sky and create an ultra-bright Christmas star. Jupiter and Saturn are separated by hundreds of millions of kilometers, but from our vantage point, says Professor Delaney, they will look like beads on a string, and they will get within 1/10 of a degree tonight, technical term being that they're going to kiss in the night sky. While great conjunctions occur almost every 20 years, the last time Jupiter and Saturn were this close to one another was in 1623, and it just so happens to land on the winter solstice this year. And we have attached the link for your perusal. Here is a picture of Saturn at the top and Jupiter below, which are framed between the two twin steeples of St. Joseph Catholic Church Saturday, December 19, 2020 in Topeka, Kansas. What is very interesting about it, beside being a Catholic steeples church from the church, we see here that Christ was born at the Feast of Tabernacle, which is a fall feast, and not in the midst of the winter. And this you can find an explanation in this particular link here on when was Christ born. It would be right to remember that Saturn and Jupiter are two planets. They are not stars as the Christmas star here that is being called. They are planets and they do not provide any light, just like when you look at the Earth is a planet but does not provide its own light. It is actually shining the light from the sun. As we look now at an important article from Desire of Ages, an important page 60, we might be now convinced otherwise than celebrating the birth of Christ on the Feast of Saturnalia, which that's what Christmas is all about. Saturnalia was a pagan feast celebrated in honor of Saturn, just like the other planet that we use for the planetary week of the Gregorian calendar. And this is definitely not from Christian basis. But we have from the pen of inspiration this important information. The wise men had seen a mysterious light in the heavens upon that night when the glory of God flooded the hills of Bethlehem. As the light faded, a luminous star appeared and lingered in the sky. It was not a fixed star nor a planet, and the phenomenon excited the keenest interest. That star was a distant company of shining angels, but of this the wise men were ignorant. Yet they were impressed that the star was of special import to them. They consulted priests and philosophers and searched the scrolls of the ancient records, which we should do at this time more than ever. The prophecy of Balaam had declared, that we find in Numbers chapter 24 verse 17, that there shall come a star out of Jacob and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Could this strange star have been sent as a harbinger of the promised one? The Magi had welcomed the light of heaven-sent truth. Now it was shed upon them in brighter rays. Through dreams they were instructed to go in search of the newborn prince. This is presented in order to counteract what is being declared basically in this article, that this present a connection between Saturn and Jupiter, which they call a conjunction, was supposed to be the Christmas star. Well, there was no such a thing as Christmas, and there was no such a thing as a star. As we saw here, the star was actually a group of angels, a company of shining angels guiding the Magi to Bethlehem, where Christ the King was born. And so this again is contradicting the falsehood of Saturnalia, Christmas, and even like the fact that it's on the solstice, the winter solstice, that right now Jupiter and Saturn are the conjunction. This is in no way connected with the birth of Christ. The Magi knew the time of their visitation. Do we know the time of our visitation? It's about time maybe that we start questioning this. 14th decree. Get ready, get ready, get ready. The signs of the times, October 9, 1901. The nations are in unrest. Times of perplexity are upon us. Men's hearts are failing them for fear of the things that are coming upon the earth. But those who believe in God will hear his voice amid the storm saying, "It is I, be not afraid." Manuscript releases number 3, 313, 1908. Strange and eventful history is being recorded in the books of heaven, events which it was declared should shortly precede the great day of God. Everything in the world is in an unsettled state. A new agreement of peace and safety between Palestine and Israel. The Israel-United Arab Emirates Normalization Agreement, officially the Abraham Accords Peace Agreement, is a treaty of peace, diplomatic relations, and full normalization between the United Arab Emirates and the State of Israel, which was initially agreed to in a joint statement by the United States, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates, or UAE, on August 13, 2020, officially referred to as the Abraham Accords. On August 13, 2020, the UAE Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Anwar Gargash, announced the UAE agreement to normalize relations with Israel, saying that his country wanted to deal with the threats facing the two-state solution, specifically annexation of the Palestinian territories, and urging the Palestinians and Israelis to return to the negotiating table. He indicated that he did not think that there will be any embassy in Jerusalem until after there is a final agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis. According to U.S. President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel and the United Arab Emirates will fully normalize their diplomatic relations. They will exchange embassies and ambassadors and begin cooperation across the board and on a broad range of areas, including tourism, education, healthcare, trade, and security. A joint statement issued by Trump, Netanyahu, and Zayed read, "This historic diplomatic breakthrough will advance peace in the Middle East region and is a testament to the bold diplomacy and vision of the three leaders and the courage of the United Arab Emirates and Israel to chart a new path that will unlock the great potential in the region." The UAE said it would continue to support the Palestinian people and that the agreement will maintain the prospect of a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. Despite the agreement, however, Netanyahu stated that Israel's sovereignty claim to the Jordan Valley was still on the agenda and only frozen for the time being. Zayed tweeted that the UAE and Israel also agreed to cooperation and setting a roadmap towards establishing a bilateral relationship. White House Abraham Accords signing ceremony on September 15, 2020. The treaty was signed on September 15, 2020. The treaty recognizes each state's sovereignty, obliges the two states to exchange ambassadors, and conclude bilateral agreements on several topics, including visa agreements, and will enter into force upon ratification. The agreement was ratified by the Israeli government on October 12 and was ratified by the Knesset on October 15, 2020. We attached the link for your perusal. Do you believe that Abraham Accords, which is basically a fight between Ishmael people and Isaac people for over 3,500 years, will come to pass with this agreement that was now brought together with the Israeli and the Palestinian? We surely hope so. Future will tell. 14th decree. Get ready, get ready, get ready. Selected messages 2/52/1890. Satan is working in the atmosphere. He's poisoning the atmosphere, and here we are dependent upon God for our lives, our present and eternal lives. And being in the position that we are, we need to be wide awake, wholly devoted, wholly converted, wholly consecrated to God. But we seem to sit as though we were paralyzed. God of heaven, wake us up. Selected messages 3/391/1891. God has not restrained the powers of darkness from carrying forward their deadly work of vitiating the air, one of the sources of life and nutrition, with the deadly miasma. Not only is vegetable life affected, but man suffers from pestilence. These things are the result of drops from the vials of God's wrath being sprinkled on the earth, and are but faint representations of what will be in the near future. The pen of inspiration also adds, God takes responsibility for that which he allows and does not prevent. As an example, we have here Exodus chapter 7 verse 3, chapter 8 verse 32, when Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not let God's people go. And we know the result of his stubbornness. Another example taken from 1 Chronicles chapter 10 verses 4, 13, and 14, where we find that upon disobedience to God's command not to consult with familiar spirit, Saul actually finds death in the battlefield. Well, actually, he kills himself, throwing himself on his own sword. And this was a punishment of disobedience to God. As we continue with manuscript releases, 19, 382, 1897, famines will increase. Pestilences will sweep away thousands. Danger are all around us from the powers without and satanic workings within. But the restraining power of God is now being exercised. Letters 258, 1907. I have been shown that the Spirit of the Lord is being withdrawn from the earth. God's keeping power will soon be refused to all who continue to disregard his commandments. The reports of fraudulent transactions, murders, and crimes of every kind are coming to us daily. Iniquity is becoming so common a thing that it no longer shocks the senses as it once did. And though these letters seem to be so old, 1890, 1891, 1897, and 1907, let us remember that with God, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. And these were warning, preparing the people for the World War I that came up in 1914, followed by 25 years later by the Second World War. And we know the rest is history as far as how many wars we have seen and nations suffering from famine and pestilence since then. These are warning for us today, and we must take heed. Going to the bank for food, not money. The growing reality of hunger in rich countries, with a solution right next to it, country living and agriculture. Reading from an article from World Report, in 2020, now 2021, you should be watching for more people going hungry and relying on aid to feed their families in the world's wealthiest countries. The United Kingdom offers a stark example, as Human Rights Watch has documented, which is these people who write this World Report. Since cuts in public spending on welfare for the poorest families began in 2010, use of the country's largest network of food banks, making up an estimated 2/3 of the country's food aid distribution, has skyrocketed 50-fold to 1.6 million 3-day emergency packages handed out last year. Smaller independent food banks have gone from a handful countrywide a decade ago to around 820 today, and this is in the UK alone. Schools, kindergartens, community centers, local charities, and faith groups have stepped in to fill gaps resulting from a decade of cuts. Today, many provide food to vulnerable families, often with working parents, even making sure children get one warm meal a day during school holidays. The UK is not alone. Germany's TAFL network of around 940 food banks or food tables, which opened in 1993, gave food to 1.65 million people last year. It has seen steady rises in demand over the past decade and a half, with more and more women, children, and older people needing food aid. In France, the Resto du Cœur, Restaurant of the Heart network gave out around 130 million meals in 2017-18, the last year for which they have figures, through their emergency food aid program. One-third of such aid was directed to single-parent families, and there is increasing concern about older people left to rely on their aid. Analysts who have studied how food banks have become a feature of daily life over decades in the United States and Canada have warned that without a clear strategy to tackle hunger and improve social security, use of emergency food aid is likely to become normalized and permanent. This hunger, so long a feature of poorer countries, risks becoming normalized in richer ones, eroding people's faith in their democratic institutions and the relatively resource-rich societies in which they live. Another world report from Human Rights Watch. As killer robots loom, demands grow to keep humans in control of use of force. In 2020, 2021, you should be watching for growing international rejections of killer robots, weapons that would kill without meaningful human control, and increasing calls for a new treaty to preemptively ban them. Allowing machines to select and target human prey without human intervention sounds like something out of an apocalyptic science fiction movie. But in many respects, we are teetering on the edge of this threshold. Nations, including China, Israel, South Korea, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, are already developing and deploying precursors to fully autonomous weapons, such as armed drones that are remotely piloted by a human. These countries are investing heavily in military applications of artificial intelligence, AI, with the goal of gaining a technological advantage in next-generation autonomy on the battlefield. These are the same countries resisting demands from dozens of states from a new ban treaty to ensure meaningful human control over the use of force. They call efforts to regulate killer robots premature and reject concerns that such weapons would threaten the right to life and principles of human dignity, or that they would fail to meet international law standards, including rules of distinction, proportionality, and military necessity. But change is on the way as momentum to regulate intensifies. Killer robots are now seen as one of the top existential threats faced by the planet. A growing number of states and some unlikely allies are now backing the drive for a new treaty to prohibit lethal autonomous weapons systems, which Nobel Peace laureates warn would cross a moral and ethical Rubicon. We're really entering an interesting age in warfare. Another world report by Human Rights Watch. With millions out of school, the countdown begins to get all children into quality, accessible education. In 2020-2021, you should be watching for the clock ticking on the 10-year countdown to get all children into education and to end restrictive, discriminatory government policies that keep millions out of class. These policies are rarely seen as what they are: human rights abuses on a vast scale, which perpetuate inequality and discrimination and deprive school children of education, a right fundamental to their development and ability to demand their rights. There's just a decade to go for governments to meet the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015, with quality education for all, one of its main pillars. In 2019, more than 260 million children did not go to school, according to the United Nations, with conflict-affected areas particularly hard hit. Around 50% of out-of-school children of primary school age live in such areas, and 617 million youth worldwide lack basic mathematics and literacy skills. Children with disabilities are frequently denied school, overlooked, and uncounted. Girls are particularly vulnerable to dropping out due to sexual harassment, child marriage, and gender discrimination. Taliban acid attacks against girls who go to school aren't even the tip of the iceberg. Experts have warned about an education crisis for over a decade, with stalling quality and access to education, growing numbers of young people leaving schools without the skills they need, and large gaps in education funding. But the leadership needed to resolve it is lacking. Human Rights Watch reported on government's responsibility for an education deficit back in 2005. This report, while it sounds very good in wanting to protect the right of young people and calling it a discriminatory policy from the part of the government by keeping millions out of class, is, we know, directly connected to this project, the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, adopted by the United Nations, but also we know directly connected to the Papal Global Compact on Education. It is a known fact that the papacy declares that give me the children and I will give you a religion. And behind their willingness to participate and help the United Nations, which we know is under the Rome Covenant, we know too, and we are wondering what kind of an education are they planning for the children of the whole world. True education, with our program on Generation 144K and 144,000 teachers, though seeming very small right now, may very well grow according to God's will to present to children a homeschooling program and a tutoring program for not only young children but for young adults that will fulfill the need for the kingdom of heaven and preparing them to one day be part of the people of God. 14th decree, get ready, get ready, get ready. Luke chapter 21 verse 11, and great earthquakes shall be in divers places, and famines and pestilences, and fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. Luke chapter 21 verse 26, men's heart failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Here is the National Joshua Fund, which is an analysis of the reaction of non-Christian and Christian respondents to the coronavirus pandemic. In a short report, we will give you an idea of what non-Christian respondents and Christian respondents think about this pandemic and what it did affect in their life. As a result of this unprecedented global coronavirus pandemic and economic chaos and the fear of uncertainty that they have created, the Joshua Fund was asking the non-Christian respondent if they would say that they have more interest now in God and spiritual matter. And they had to answer, yes, I am reading the Bible more than ever before. Yes, I am now listening, watching Bible teaching and Christian sermons online since I cannot go to church. Yes, I am searching online to learn more about Bible prophecy and God's plan for the future of mankind. Yes, and I'm having more spiritual conversation with friends. Nope, the crisis has not changed my level of interest in God, the Bible, or spiritual matters at all. And we're sure as you look at this number now, you're probably not surprised, but it is very sad. 63% of the people interviewed said no. The crisis has not changed my mind about God, the Bible, or spiritual matters at all. 22 said yes. which are represented here by 7% that says that it makes them read their Bible more than ever before. 2% that they're listening to Bible sermons now. 5% that they are searching online for Bible prophecy and God's plan for the future of mankind. And also question on spiritual conversation with people, with friends was 8%. So the way to read this particular report here or chart is simply as this. So if you add 63 plus 22, this is where you get 85%. The other 15% is right here. And this has to do with people who did not know or refused to answer, so which makes up the 100%. So the 22% is actually represented by these low data of people who basically, they're non-Christian respondent, but at least they were able to say, yes, I'm reading my Bible, I'm listening more. And the Joshua Fund reported that fully 1 in 5 non-Christian, or 21.5%, this is American, by the way, the poll said the crisis is causing them to start reading the Bible and listen to Bible teaching and Christian sermons online, even though they don't usually listen, and to search online to learn more about Bible prophecy and God's plan for the future of mankind, and even have more spiritual conversations with families and friends. So this is a report that could sound encouraging, but 1 in 5 non-Christian, 21.5% of the people that have been polled. They don't tell us how many they did poll. However, we can see the results are already very evident that 63%, even if it was 100 people, that means 63 people said, nope, the crisis has not changed my mind. 15, they didn't know, which means 15 people out of 100. And if you want a larger scale of statistic, you can say 1,000, then I mean 630 said no, it didn't change my mind. Or if you do 10,000, then you will get to 6,300, etc. So the percentage is not that encouraging. 1 in 5, and they try to use the word fully here. 1 in 5 non-Christian. That is the percentage for this particular study. Following the Joshua Fund report on the reaction on the people with the global coronavirus pandemic and economic chaos, we're looking now at the Christian respondents. And we must admit that the answer is even more sad than with the non-Christian respondent. The same question were asked of them if they were reading their Bible more because of this, or listening and watching Bible teaching and Christian sermon online, if they're searching online to learn more about the Bible prophecy and God's plan for the future of mankind. No, the crisis has not changed my level of interest in God, the Bible, or spiritual matters at all. So if we are to compare with the precedent graphic, we can see here instead of 63%, we have 53% of the respondent, but this time Christian respondent that said no. This did not increase their need for God more. And as we read here, instead of 22%, 40% says yes. This has increased their level of reading the Bible, 14%, Bible teaching, 16%, learning more online, 10%, and 7% did not know or refused to answer. So when we compare, we have a 63 with the non-Christian, but 53 only for the respondents. So if we have, actually, it's not only, it's almost the same. If we have an average of 100 people or 1,000 people like we did in the other chart, 100 people would mean that 53 Christian respondents did not affect them to increase their need in God, their interest in God, in the Bible, or spiritual matters. So it's only 10 people less than the non-Christian. And instead of the 22 that we had with the non-Christian, we have 40 now that says yes. So it's a bit of an encouragement here. However, and when you analyze again, 53 plus 40 will give you the 93, and the 7 here is your 100%. So the 40% is inclusive right here. So nearly 3 in 10 Americans, 29.4% instead of 21.5%, polled believe the coronavirus and economic meltdown are signs that we are living in what the Bible calls the last days. So it is sad indeed that for Christians to respond this way, and maybe in a way they're perhaps not concerned about what's happening in the world. We understand that. Maybe they have sufficient faith in God that this does not affect them. So it could be very positive in a way. But on the other hand, we believe that it could also be that they are really Christian and maybe only by name, not by action. We cannot judge. We can leave that judgment to God, but we hope that if this questionnaire was coming our way, we could say that every day we are reading our Bible more. Every day we are learning about Bible, new Bible teaching, and we're learning more about what God has in mind for us. And the prophecy out there, very, very, under our very eyes right now, fulfilling. This is what we would expect for Christians to respond to this questionnaire. 14th decree, get ready, get ready, get ready. Selected messages to 141, 1904. Again and again, the Lord has instructed that our people are to take their families away from the cities into the country where they can raise their own provisions, for in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. We should now begin to heed the instruction given us over and over again. Get out of the cities into rural districts where the houses are not crowded closely together and where you will be free from the interference of enemies. 14th decree, get ready, get ready, get ready. Letter 90, 1897. When the power invested in kings is allied to goodness, it is because the one in responsibility is under the divine dictation. When power is allied with wickedness, it is allied to satanic agencies, and it will work to destroy those who are the Lord's property. The Protestant world have set up an idol Sabbath in the place where God's Sabbath should be, and they are treading in the footsteps of the papacy. For this reason, I see the necessity of the people of God moving out of the cities into retired country places where they may cultivate the land and raise their own produce. Thus, they may bring their children up with simple, healthful habits, and I see the necessity of making haste to get all things ready for the crisis. Manuscript release 3/305/1906. The time of troubles such as was not since there was a nation, according to Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, is right upon us, and we are like the sleeping virgins. We are to awake and ask the Lord Jesus to place underneath us his everlasting arms and carry us through the time of trial before us. The Review and Herald, February 11, 1904. The world is becoming more and more lawless. Soon great trouble will arise among the nations, trouble that will not cease until Jesus comes. Testimony for the Church, number 9, page 43, 1909. We are on the very verge of the time of trouble, and perplexities that are scarcely dreamed of are before us. Prophets and Kings, page 278, 1914. We are standing on the threshold of the crisis of the ages. In quick succession, the judgments of God will follow one another. Fire and flood and earthquake with war and bloodshed. Christian Service, page 136, 1905. There are stormy times before us, but let us not utter one word of unbelief or discouragement. 14th decree, get ready, get ready, get ready. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, page 716, 1889. Let the watchmen now lift up their voice and give the message which is present truth for this time. Let us show the people where we are in prophetic history. Fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine, thou art mine. I have called thee by thy name. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee. And through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When I walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. Fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine, thou art mine. I have called thee by thy name. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee. And through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. Fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine, thou art mine. I have called thee by thy name.